Welcome to Masters of Growth for Plaintiff Law Firms. This is where we sit down and talk to industry leaders to bring you lessons, stories, and insights that will help you grow your revenue, margins, and the happiness that you have at work. Okay, I am super excited for our guest today. We have Seth Price, who is the managing partner at Price Benowitz, a personal injury firm that he scaled from just himself and his partner up to over 40 attorneys now, I believe. And after mastering the art of scaling his own firm and solving all the problems that are associated with that, he's now helping all kinds of other B2C firms using some of the same methodologies he's used and using SEO and digital marketing strategies. And he's doing all that through his agency, Blue Shark Digital. I just love the fact that you both have done it yourself and you're helping other firms now. And I'm just super excited to chat with you today here, Seth, and share your wisdom with the audience.
Well, Julian, great to be here. Thank you for having me. I just have one correction. We have not solved anything. It is a constant work in progress. Anywhere from like 45 lawyers, and every day there are new obstacles, new personalities, new systems breaking, new systems that need to be created, new opportunities. So it is always exciting and evolving, but far from solved.
Fair point. That's true. It's an ever evolving game of little things breaking and tweaking and improving. So that makes total sense. I guess maybe the first thing I was just curious to dig into is like, what made you go from running your firm and growing your firm and just all the things involved with that, like you mentioned, to wanting to start an agency that helps other firms? Tell me a little bit about that transition.
Well, it started more natural. People say, oh my God, you're in two different organizations. But essentially, we built our firm up to about 20 lawyers using digital marketing.
Yeah.
And that digital marketing was great. Our team internally started to grow. And in its essence, we thought if we could do it for ourselves, we could do it for others. That was our driving mission. More from the entrepreneur's point of view, I had consistently hired people to help be my wingman or wingwoman over the course of a decade. And every 2 years, like clockwork, I'd lose that person. And I'd have to start over. Now, it was cost effective because the new person came was pretty cheap, and I trained them. And it wasn't like they went off to compete against us. They would like go off and do different stuff. They just weren't sticky to what we were doing. And I looked around and said, hey, can I give this to somebody else? And the way I was marketing, I didn't see any agency doing at the time anything close to what I envisioned or what we were doing. And so by creating the agency, we essentially gave opportunity to our own employees to become leadership and build and scale something. And you've been through this. You saw what happened at Hootsuite and how addicting that could be to build something from nothing. And so for us, we were able to take people who were passionate about digital marketing, really good at it, knew what they were doing and getting ridiculous results, to be able to have a national and now international footprint with what they were doing rather than just being an in-house team.
I love that. You probably attract better talent in-house with that as well, because then you've got that path for them.
Correct. I mean, path is always important, and it's interesting because there's an evolution. I think you speak to most agency owners, they'll see that. I think law firm owners, I think it's same. Some exceptions that when you start, you put a shingle out, put a sign up, and yes, in the startup world, you may get people, but when you got nothing, you get what you get. You don't get upset. And we got lucky. Some of the people came at the very beginning that stayed with us. And some of the people had to be fired because they were like, dishing Adderall around the office. But my point was that we had one guy that came in with a laptop to run his day trading while he worked early on. I mean, over time, you figure out not only what you need, you get better at interviewing, but you get a brand and people see it and they want to be part of it. So when it started, we were actually, great, crazy story. We were Blue Spark Digital. I thought that was a great name because I came up with it. I got a cease and desist letter and we were like, okay, what should we do? And the lawyers were like, well, you can pay me $80,000 or just change the name. And I got that advice twice. So I changed the name. And it was like, at one point, when you say something enough, it becomes a brand. And now within the legal space, it's something that's known and that people know it. It's like it's in there, just like when you first heard the word Amazon, you're like, it's a rainforest. What does that have to do with it? Now you can't, it's ubiquitous. So I think that as that brand becomes something, and whether you're a local law firm, a startup like Hootsuite or Blue Shark, as that brand develops and somebody who's searching for a job has social touch points for it, maybe people that have worked there, maybe it's just reviews online, whatever it is, that then ends up becoming something bigger. And you're not working for a guy sitting on egg crates, but rather it's an ongoing entity that's not going anywhere. And people feel like they could have a career at that place.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, maybe even before Blue Shark came to be, it's however many years ago, it's you running the law firm, sitting on the proverbial milk crate, I think you said.
Literally, we were our original law firm office. Well, one was a Regis office internal. It's 100 square feet. We outgrew that in a week. But the office itself that we had for the first 5, 6, 7 years was a townhouse where the floor sloped. And by the time we took over the third floor, you could put a marble on the floor and it would go to the other side of the room.
I love those early day startup stories. You're always just kind of like going with whatever you can get. So that makes total sense. What got you to think about scale? Because I've met with a lot of firms that are, 1, 2, 3 person firms. And either they don't know how to scale, they don't think about growth, they don't understand what it takes to get to growth. But it seems like there's a mindset of like, I want to grow to this next level. What made you want to scale? At what point did you start thinking about the brand that you wanted to create with the law firm first?
So on one sense, I forced the issue because from day one, I didn't take any cases. I think once or twice I showed up to court in the early months where a continuance needed to be granted. But I was really not part of the sausage making. We divided and conquered. So we ran it from day one like a business, which I think was a big advantage. One. And secondly, when you look at that growth, some of it had to do with it worked and we kept going. I don't think I had a plan from day one at the law firm. But when you saw, okay, if I add digital media here, I could get this many more calls. I'll have these people answer the phone. It made sense and allowed it to transpire. So I think some of it was I had been in the prior generation of the dot-com bubble in the late 90s in New York and saw how things could scale. So I think that it wasn't conscious, just like when we're talking about attribution today. Like, I don't think I said, hey, I'm going to scale, but I had seen what happens. It wasn't like I was taking private equity or venture capital in, but I was able to say, if I make the phone ring more, then I'll hire more people. And that was sort of the fun adventure that we went on.
Fascinating. So you, A, had exposure to other companies scaling, and B, like, did you consciously think from the beginning, I don't want to actually work these cases? It's going to be my job to help bring them in.
So interesting backstory. When we started this, I went into business with my law partner, still around today, Benowitz, the Price Benowitz, who was a lawyer's lawyer. And when we started, I actually named the firm the Law Office of David Benowitz, even though I was a barred lawyer who could practice, because he had the name. And I thought that, well, if I'm there, people would say, he doesn't really know what he's doing, but this guy does. And it became really apparent, what I'll call the mother-in-law factor, that nobody working for a single person can work, but it's not like it's just a name, like how stuff is becoming the Pillsbury law firm is just Pillsbury instead of a longer name. But when you work for just a person, it's different. And that people don't like as much as working for something, right? If this was the Julian social media company, that's one thing. But when it was Hootsuite, it was like, that's a thing. And I think that by adding two names to it in the legal space, that made it a thing and people wanted to be part of it. Whereas if it was just a person, it was capped at what it could be. And this allowed people the vision, not our vision, but their vision, that this was something bigger than two schmucks, but rather a legal entity. And at the time, there weren't a lot of people scaling legal. There were people that had basically taken law firms that were really crappy and scaled those where there was no legal acumen, but they were good at marketing, or people were boutique. And so when we started this in DC in what I'll call the B2C space, people hadn't scaled criminal or PI that much, and that we were able to do something that it was saying, hey, you can take great marketing and meld it with great lawyering. And that became a thing. And I feel that was, in reverse, when Blue Shark started, there were no shortage of agencies, but there were agencies generally that they may have legal clients, but they just picked a niche rather than saying, hey, we get that this is different. Content is important for all SEO. It's good for websites. And that in legal, if you screw it up, you can lose your bar license. So it's a different risk calculus than if you're in plumbing, which is you're not going to lose your plumbing license if you say something wrong on your website. And so the idea that it was something that had specific differences and treating it that way, I think was a big differentiator.
Interesting. When you're kind of a trailblazer in the scaling up an actual law firm, rather than just being sort of a marketing entity, you're like, we're going to combine really good law with scale. And then kind of found another niche with Blue Shark Digital where it's like, hey, we actually come from this world. We know this world. We're going to specialize in this world. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and look, with everything, there's a yin yang as you scale. I mean, when you left Hootsuite, how many employees did you have?
When I left Hootsuite, we were at 650 or so.
Right. That means you had a 650th worst employee. That with scale, problems happen. So I think that one of the things that, we've evolved and I think the business world has evolved is by adding those systems in place, it allows you to leverage everybody, the best of the 650 and the worst. And then if you don't, that's where you run into problems that you can't, that it's creating those systems and processes. So knowing that everybody's not going to be one of those top 10 employees.
Yeah.
But then you still want to be able to deliver an excellent product. And, I've reflected a lot upon, Michael Gerber's E-Myth and the McDonald's analogy. It's like, can you have this system? You take the thing out of the box, you take the burger, you flip it, you put it on the grill. There's a whole order. And during COVID, we actually had him on one of my podcasts. It was a lot of fun, but it is one of those pieces where I think a lot of the pain comes is where the systemization ends and the creativity begins. And that happens a lot in law firms, why law firms I think are particularly challenging to scale. And that it's the intersection with people where it's not a bot. It's not two AI voices speaking to each other, but it's a real person running their business that Blue Shark has to speak to, understand their pain points, work with them, and build together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Where the systems ends and the creativity begins, that's a really good line, because at every business there is that. And it's just some businesses, there's not a whole lot of creativity, and there's some businesses where you have to have more on an ongoing basis. Maybe switching gears a bit, I'm just curious, with all the firms that you meet with and talk to now and that you're helping with, if you think about a firm at around, let's say, 2 million in annual revenue, and they're trying to get up to 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. What are the most common challenges or problems or barriers to growth that you see at the firms that are trying to get there?
I smile. It's a great question. I think the thing that holds people back at law firms specifically is not building up the non-lawyer talent and resources. I can speak for myself. It took me a long time to bring on that law firm administrator, and then finding somebody and then scaling that position so that it's not just one person, but rather a team of people over time. Now, 2 million, you can't have a large team, but you got to start somewhere. And that as you build those resources to treat it like a business rather than a law practice where you have a lawyer leading it, the sooner you can find those people that are going to help with the non-legal components, with delivery, with marketing, with all those pieces, that to me is the fuel that you need to get to the next level. There are people that don't go that route, that just become so expert in what they do that they can generate huge fees. But even if you look back and you look at, I remember the story of Johnny Cochran, who was an integral player in the OJ case, and he had a firm that was crushing it. And my understanding through my friends who ended up partnering with him was that his firm was generating $10 million a year back in the 90s. That was a big deal back then. However, I think their burn rate was like 12 to 14 million. It was not, I don't think, again, and what my point was, is that when he brought people on that could scale it and leverage that brand across, that was a game changer, because he was an amazing practitioner, but he likely was not investing in that management that's needed. Because if you look at the .coms you've been a part of, right, management's essential, right? There may be a founder, and that founder may be the ideas person, but there are people who are not, social media gurus in your case, who were out there, who were building the organization methodically, building systems, having checks and balances, and that most law firms are, late to the game with that, present company included. And then I think the good news is there's so many resources out there where people are evangelizing. At the beginning, it may just be an admin that you promote to firm, the firm admin. But the sooner you get people who are doing those things and connecting it, and then either elevating or laterally recruiting in and giving up some control. And you know what? It's not going to be as good as if you do it yourself. It won't. But every time you do something that you shouldn't be doing, I always say in my office with Blue Shark and Price Benowitz, that's a job. It's not a business. The business is when there's a team of people executing and, you're not essential to it. And while you're still essential, it's a hustle. And again, I'm not saying that it's not going to happen day one, but if you want to get from 2 million to 10 million, it's making yourself less essential.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Early in my career, we brought in the former global VP of sales at SAP. This was actually at Hootsuite, and he scaled part of our team quite a bit. The part of the go-to-market function he scaled up. And I remember he said, I'm just like this, work, do everything, work. And he said, Julian, if I'm doing my job as the VP of, at the time now, I think his org was like a couple hundred people. He's like, if I'm doing my job, I should be able to leave for 6 months and everything's fine. And I should come back and we should hit the target number that I said we were going to hit 6 months ago. And I was like, oh, wow, you're playing a different game than me. So that makes total sense.
But I think the point is well taken, a little bit of exaggeration. But the idea is, and look, I'll tell you, this is what lawyers get stuck on, which is when you hire somebody, especially at the senior point. I just had this, on the business development side of Blue Shark, I just saw it. When you hire a senior badass, you're just like, oh my God, all this work's going to get done. Like, no, you need to staff it with people to do the work. And it's awful because I've seen it both directions. You can have all the staff and they're there, but unless there's a great manager, you're not going to get out of them what's possible. Unless there's accountability and tracking and systems and all that design going on. But if you just bring somebody super senior in, if you're a $2 million firm and you hire a true COO who knows what they're doing, yes, they may or may not, they might roll up their sleeves. They probably won't as much as you need, but you need someone. So it's like, you got to walk before you run. And if you need an admin and you need now a firm admin, now a law firm administrator, each of those pieces are there and you're probably not ready for that next piece. And if you go too much, if they brought that guy in, that guy got drunk one night and said, you know what? I'm going to this $2 million firm. They gave me a couple $100,000 and I want to try law and I'm going to do it. He wouldn't, because what he's doing is managing other widgets, people. And if he doesn't have Julian there to be the worker bees, then he can't take somebody and shape them and work them into what they're capable of. It's finding that right person at the right time. Easier said than done, but knowing that if you don't invest in that, then that is definitely something that will slow up growth, and worse, can be a risk factor. I had years when I was in the Inc. 5000 for both Blue Shark and Price Benowitz, but there become times when you're in that process and like, okay, you're now multi 8 figures, you're not growing as fast, But if you don't have those people and systems in place, when somebody leaves, it can throw you in a tailspin that takes you a year or two to get out of. And so that by having that, by building that non-law firm, non-lawyer infrastructure, it not only allows you to grow, but I believe protects you from falling.
That's a really great insight. Maybe thinking about firms that have put some of that infrastructure in place, they've got some of that non-lawyer infrastructure, maybe just kind of leaning on your experience and wisdom in the marketing world. What are some of the biggest challenges or problems that you're seeing firms have from a marketing or case acquisition perspective? Like, what are the biggest missed opportunities or biggest mistakes people are making?
I'll put it in a couple of categories. I'm digital first. I love it. It's getting really competitive. Google's trying to squeeze every dollar they can out of it. So it is not an easy game. There are a lot of markets where paid search doesn't even work anymore. We're SEO first. We do plenty of paid search. We love LSAs. They're getting to the point where PPC in many markets is not cost effective, and LSAs are not there yet, but we're heading in that direction. So it means that when you see the business world, when you're used to venture capitalists or private equity people investing, these guys are ruthlessly efficient with how they do things. Maybe too much so in many cases. But I think that law firms have very often not run as businesses. They ran as practices. We're practicing law. And that as you start to compete and want to get cases, we're seeing, Arizona, Utah, and DC to a lesser extent having non-lawyer ownership. As rational business players start to infiltrate the legal landscape, you're going to have to be better at what you do, and you're not going to be able to be as sloppy, and you're going to have to make sure table stakes, answering the phone. This is not like I'm preaching. I know how hard it is. I have 25 people answering my calls. When you have a great intake manager, that's awesome, and you're on a great roll. When there's issue, drama, exiting, it can cause major issues. I would argue that is one of the most tumultuous places in a law firm and the area for the easiest growth. Yes, you need to get the phone to ring, but the number of law firms that can make more money closing the hole in the bucket without spending another dime on marketing is not insignificant, which is a good thing in the sense that it shows you there's opportunity there. Very, very rare. And I've been there. I've had the highest highs. I've had the lowest lows. I've been, somewhere in the middle. As a business leader, if you poll 1,000 law firm owners and you ask them, do you get every call that you want? Yeah, I get every call I want. Far from the truth. And I've seen it. I've seen data on mine that says I'm getting 96%. The 96% of calls are being answered, and we're getting 92% of our wants. That's amazing, right? And then you start to then you dig deeper, and you're like, well, what's judging our want? If we don't get, if we don't pick up the call hypothetically, and we don't get the person back, well, that can't be in the want category because we didn't know we wanted it. Or is it one where if you're, sort of like dating, if the girl's not into you or the guy's not into you, depending on the situation, and you say, well, I wasn't into that person anyway. So is some of this done based on what's happening rather than an objective set of metrics that says, hey, this would have been a great mate for me. The fact they didn't want me, that sucks. As opposed to, no, I didn't really want them anyway. If you could say, I really want these cases and I didn't get these, it can build and grow. But if everything you don't get, you didn't want anyway, wasn't a good fit, then you're never going to build and grow.
Interesting. Sounds like you're lying to yourself to not have to face that problem.
Oh, and that is a truism amongst lawyers out there, that we bury our heads in the sand. And the sooner you get to that, Bill Biggs, one of my mentors, maniacally focuses on percentage of wants. It's so few firms measure it, but once you start doing it, it's a game changer. And even with that, how you measure what a want is becomes an important factor, but measuring wants, and look, it's true for everything. Podcast guests, clients for your startup, whatever it is, can you be honest about what it is? Because once you get to real numbers and you can improve, market differently, you can spend on marketing knowing this is going to be my conversion rate and I can work with it versus I'm getting everything I want. And it is I see that that's one of the journeys that I've been on and evolving that really has hit home is if you talk about measure what you want to, measure everything, but measure what you want to hold accountable. You can measure things that make us feel better, but some of the really tough ones, it's worth the extra effort. Not that you're going to get perfect attribution. It's a whole other conversation, but can you know that you don't have a hole in your bucket?
That makes so much sense. What's an ideal funnel look like? And do you have any like benchmarks on conversion rates from lead to wanted case to then closed case?
I mean, by definition, meaning there's so many different types of law.
Yeah.
So many different questions. And it's really and people don't use the same language. Within PI, I see people going back and forth between case value and firm fee. The firm fee after refer. I mean, we don't even have that straight. So I can't say it should be this percentage. Something has to do turn with law in your market. If you're fee for service, what are you charging price point wise? All of those. But I think the key is, can you get a number? If you get the hamburger helper out and you now have people that have a need, whether it's fee for service, and that you are benchmarking, have some form of income or revenue to pay. That is a very different, because the first call, it could be 1 out of 10 calls. But then you say, okay, 5 of those 10 have been arrested using criminal. Okay, 5 have been arrested. Something I did when I did this myself early on. How many people who say, are you looking for a free public defender or a paid private attorney? Right? Let's say 2 of those 5 have no intention of ever hiring you. And if they do, they're not going to be able to pay you. So if you can somehow find those 3 out of 10, now it becomes interesting. Now the question is, what can you get of the people that have the need and are at least, not, underwater? Somebody who's not qualifying for the public defender, somebody who's in play where they're going to hire somebody. The question is you. And then there's a question of, is your number? Then it becomes interesting. So to me, your percentage of those 3 is a lot more interesting than telling me that that you're scoring, because the first number I think can mask a lot of issues. Whereas, the first number, which is greater, as you start nailing down, you're like, these are people we should get. We want those. It goes back to wants. We want these people. Can we get somebody to go from, I don't have enough in my bank account to let me speak to my mom and get the money? And that is when you're starting to sort of push forward. On the contingency side, I think it's a little bit cleaner because you don't have that monetary factor. It's just a question of like, do you want the case? And this is what's really interesting. When I spoke to a lot of my mentors, whether it be John Morgan or Mike Morrison, these guys who run giant firms, Richard Harris, the better ones are just taking everything in and allowing their team to reject the ones they want later. And I think that's a struggle within a lot of firms, my present firm included, that you don't want to be overly critical on the intake, but rather allow them to be what their job is, which is, where is there a case, bring it in, and then let them err in the side of, I've taken too many, not too few.
So sign and then investigate and kind of dig in
areas where the law is clear and the statute of limitations is not far off. To me, that is the ideal. The question is, how much can we get? So, are we going to be able to screen who does have something viable and maybe getting them to a human? Because we talked about it, you had 650 people, you had a 650 at worst. If you could have 2 intake instead of 5, because those people are only dealing with meat and they can close better, then spreading all your cases amongst 5, those are the things that I'm most excited about the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Interesting. So just sort of to recap, there's not an ideal benchmark of conversion rates that makes sense, but it's just getting clear on those actual, like, what are you actually measuring, making sure you're recording them. I talked to a firm the other day. They just didn't know their wanted rate at all. They're like, we had 100 leads a month.
90% don't.
That fascinates me. I mean, maybe just from a tech background, like
exactly.
you qualify a lead right off the bat and you're like, is this a fit or is it not a fit?
it's complicated. It shouldn't be, but like there's a lot of show empathy talk. I'm very much, my mantra is, look, Julian, I see you have a legal issue. I'm going to give you as much time as you need to tell me about it. I have 3 or 4 questions up front. Let me ask them. Because if I find out that you know what, you need a lawyer in Milwaukee and it's bankruptcy. If I just spend 5 minutes being empathetic to you, maybe you're going to like me and send me something later, but I can also go to a bar and talk to somebody and they might like me and send me something. No, I'm being serious. That's a mantra. Like, oh, those people. And I'm like, and to me, knowing what bucket you're in is table stakes. It's how you've lived your entrepreneurial life and your startup life. It is not the DNA of law firms. It is not maniacal. It's very much, people are calling the phones. In the old days, it was a receptionist. Phones, every phone call gets answered. Yes. But if you could magically know, while we're sitting here, my cell phone's rang 3 times. And thankfully, we're at the point now where it says in big letters, spam. Right? So the fact that we're there, and then I'm not saying, hey, Julian, hold on a second, I'll deal with this. All calls are not created equal.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Going back to something you said earlier about the erring on the side of taking more cases. So qualifying those cases.
Plaintiffs work without a statute of limitations issue.
Makes sense. Erring on the side of that, like what prevents firms from doing that? Because I've talked to a lot of firms that are like, no, we got to investigate everything. And unless we have all these documentation, we're never going to sign this case.
There are differences. If you're in med mal, you got to do that because it would be a shit show. There are negatives. Yeah. When you drop a case, if you don't do it well, even if you do it well, there's a risk of a bad review. So that's a risk. You just people being mad. You don't want people mad. And no matter what you say, you'd say, we're going to go and investigate this. It's an investigation. It may or may not show. And just like if you check into a hotel and somebody gets an upgrade, they're thrilled. And if they get like a regular room, they're like, ah. So if you take somebody's case and you don't upgrade them to a full client and you say, I'm really sorry, we investigated, but the law doesn't match, there's a risk to that. That said, that's why I think you see some of the bigger advertising firms have some dings on reviews to a certain extent for a bunch of reasons. But one is that. And it's a struggle I've had internally at my own firm. And I have lawyers that want that will, there's it becomes a culture issue where why did you sign this case? And the answer should be, you know what? As long as I have a 30% or less attrition rate, you should be giving me a high five. I'll go back to when I first had my intake team, not great systems. We were selling more through personality. And I would say to people, somebody's very passive, like, hey, you're like on the passive to aggressive scale, you're a 3 out of 10. I said, you know what? Go to a 7. Be as aggressive as you can. And the first time somebody, call somebody back every day until they tell you to F off, that they don't want you. And what I would say is, this is the law firm, what I would say is the first time somebody calls up upset that you're being overly aggressive, I'm going to give you a high five and a bonus. If it becomes, hey, this guy's a complete a-hole, we're going to have a conversation about it. But this person's so far, it's like it's a degree of where you are. And I feel that is similar here. It's not that you shouldn't hear people out, but the more you're able to immediately pre-qualify, a word that to you is table stakes, to other people is not. The more you can do that, then you can spend your most time with your A players with those people.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's also better for the consumer as well. Like I want to know as quickly as possible as a consumer, whether you think I'm a fit or not, whichever service provider I'm reaching out to. So I totally agree with you. A couple more questions, just being mindful of time and then we can wrap things up. Talking about the sort of barriers or problems or mistakes when it comes to growing and acquiring new customers, you talked about intake being sort of a leaky bucket. Maybe just going to the marketing side of things. I've been in business, marketing changes, platforms changes, trends change. What are your thoughts just on where things are going? If PPC in some markets is getting to the point where it doesn't make sense anymore, what do you see as sort of the next 1 to 5 years of the marketing landscape and the opportunities available?
Well, look, nothing that's far from it. AI is changing the landscape. How search is going to be seen. Is the new ChatGPT search function going to get any legs? There are a bunch of different places. They got to get the information from somewhere. Looking at the Google landscape, which has been our home for the last number of years, I'd say the area that I see a lot of firms not focus on is reviews. And I see able-bodied people 3 people. They went to law school. They're sitting around a desk having a Zoom with me, and they have 17 reviews for their one office. They're just like, guys, you're killing me. Like, if the owner of the firm, if I said to you that each review was worth $1,000 in annual revenue, would you look at it differently? Would you, as the leader, not delegate it? Every time I've delegated reviews to a person and said, I'm turning a blind eye, it's not done nearly as well as when the leader says, this is what's important. Social proof's important. And if everybody at your firm knows it, that's your business. But if you don't let people know and give people bandwidth, when I started, I had my intake team in charge of reviews. And I did my marketing job right. So the firm zoomed, but we went 4 months without asking for a review. Right. And it killed me. And so now intake does ask for reviews, but they're not in charge of them. Somebody else is in charge of reviews. And we've gone so far as to have a full-time person whose sole job it is to connect happy clients with our Google business profile to make sure that that happens. So closing that loop.
That makes a lot of sense. It's such a low-hanging fruit as well. And I feel like sometimes as entrepreneurs, you're scared of making the ask. You're like, these people already paid you and they've been happy. Like, just make the ask. That makes a lot of sense. Final question. Where can people learn more about you? What's the best way to contact you or read about all the stuff that you're doing?
Look, I'm all over the place. I got a podcast, law firm Blueprint. I got a law firm, Price Benowitz. Got Blue Shark Digital. Find me on social. I'm older than you, so I spend more of my time on Facebook than Instagram. But if you connect me with me on LinkedIn or on Facebook, I'm happy to, I challenge people to reach out to me directly just with questions, ideas, conversation. We get plenty of people that want services, and I'm happy to connect them with our team and make great things happen. But if you just want to talk business growth or digital marketing, these are things I'm passionate about, and I challenge you to connect with me on socials.
I love it. Seth, that's awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll drop the links to all those places in the show notes so people can reach out and follow along with all the great work that you're doing. And I think there's just a ton of great insights here for folks to take and implement. So thank you for spending time with us today.
And thank you. And I can't wait to see you at one of the legal conferences and hear more about what you guys are up to, because it sounds real exciting.
Awesome. Likewise. Can't wait for it either.
Take it easy.